Yes, I wanted to take a roundabout route to it, but you're absolutely right. Of course, Ayawaso West Wuogon, sadly, infamously known for the work for the actions that resulted in the work of you and the commission. So no doubt you've been paying attention. What are your thoughts on how that particular battle has unfolded?
I think one notable thing is that the NDC has done massively well in terms of the votes that have been garnered by John. I think John's candidature, again, for political scientists, it presents interesting perspectives for study. Part of the reason is the fact that he's a young candidate. He's a media person in terms of a celebrity of a kind.
An influencer.
An influencer. He brought certain dynamics to the NDC ticket, a certain vibrancy, a certain energy and youthfulness. I'm not quite sure which of these was pivotal to his performance or success. But ultimately, one thing is clear, that the performance of the NDC may appear to be down to the candidate, because traditionally the NPP has done overwhelmingly well in that particular constituency. And so it is hard to disentangle the performance of John Dumelo from to disentangle his performance from his candidature, not just the fact that he stood on the ticket of the NDC. I think it's also interesting to see Al-Hassan, Miss Al-Hassan, perform as well as she did. And the reason is because she, again, is a substitute candidate.
Yes.
That's something we shouldn't forget. I mean, having replaced her deceased husband, who was invariably the preferred candidate of the NPP, and the NPP having agreed or allowed her to continue the work of the husband. So for her to have succeeded in the by-election and then to have succeeded in the substantive election speaks to two things. One, either the parties, or rather the voters, have a certain fidelity to the party, and therefore, regardless of who's put there as a candidate, they'll vote for the party anyway. Or the voters have come to prefer her as a good replacement of the husband. And therefore, from election to election, they have chosen to endorse her as a proper replacement in this respect. So the constituency itself manifests some dynamics, again, that we probably have to pay attention to, and not just that constituency, a few other constituencies. I think that the growth of the middle class, the demographic shifts, and a lot of movements. People who may not be resident in that area may not be resident there. The area, as you know, is filled with a lot of settlers, and so not probably necessarily traditional people from Accra, so to speak. We have a lot of new voters who have come on board. Those new voters, again, we haven't done the analysis, so nobody knows how many of those new voters may have voted for John Dumelo. If a lot of these new voters voted for John Dumelo, then of course youth may have something to do with the candidature, something to do with the contest. In which case, a lot of new voters may have preferred him on the basis of his youthfulness, on the basis of what some people may say its connection or his connectivity to the youth, and the fact that he's an influencer, as we indicated here. So some of these dynamics in terms of candidates' performances are things that may be worth research moving forward. I mean, it's still early days. A lot of the things that we say are just conjectures, but it will be interesting, exciting for us to probably find out the exact underpinnings that shaped his candidate. But he's done extremely well in terms of the number of votes he's garnered compared to the previous candidate.
This is your election headquarters. If you're tuned in on Joy 99.7 FM, we're coming to you live from the studio 997. If you're watching us on the Joy News channel, well, thank you so much for staying with us all the way through. That's all you need to do, by the way. Nothing beyond that. Just stay with us, and we will bring you the numbers as they come in. Now, if you want updates, if you need to go about your business, you need to do other things, and you want updates, go to myjoyonline.com. As soon as you open up our website, you will see all the updates, the very latest information as it comes in from across the country. Now, in a short while, we will be going for a live press conference. We are told that one of the parties, I believe the NDC, is about to hold a press conference, and there is a back and forth of press conferences throughout the night. We'll be taking you live for the next one. But yeah, very interesting pressers that we had.
I just wanted to, because we touched on the commission and its work, before we come to the press conferences, the NDC and the NPP, Ms. Abochi, I wanted to ask, we've had some pockets of violence. There's been Odododiodio, Aswasi, Fomina, the EC's district office was set on fire. So my question is, have we, considering the kind of work that the commission did, the reports that it issued, the fact that we have a law, have we dealt with these issues that have come up in this particular elections?
I have been extremely reluctant to make comments on the commission's work ever since my work was done. And the reason, as I've indicated in many cases, has been out of courtesy. I was sent to do an official assignment. I completed the official assignment. I reported to the ones that sent me, end of story. So it's the only thing really that I have not publicly been engaged in. The report is there. But the report contained all kinds of safeguards that were put in place to ensure that electoral violence were dealt with. But there's so much one can do to prevent some of these things. You can't have full security presence everywhere in a national election. Even the most advanced countries haven't been able to do that. So it's expected that pockets of violence will happen. And the question I would have to ask, and I had this interaction recently with the police, and I asked whether we have had a proper mapping of all the hotspots across the country. And if we have had proper mapping, whether we've had appropriate responses to deal with some of these potential flashpoints. And so the question I will ask is, for the ones you've mentioned, including Formina, whether these were on the hotspot list. And if they were not on the hotspot list, does that reflect a failure of intelligence in terms of the mapping?
We know Dodo is, because there are about 50 flashpoints in that constituency.
Right. So within the spectrum of human capacity, weaknesses, and failure, and therefore we can all make mistakes in terms of whatever assessments we put in place and whatever mechanisms we try to put in place, it is still imperative that at the end of this whole exercise, we have a proper introspection and a flashback analysis to get a sense of where some things may have fallen short, so that moving forward, some of these, we do not allow them. Because the problem is, when you have some of these things in strongholds of certain political parties, and the results do not favor these parties, and there were clear incidents. In fact, there was a case in which ballot boxes were supposed to have been torn into pieces. I think someone in Sunyani or someone, I can't remember. I heard something like that. I was monitoring your reports overnight, and there was a place like that where there were, ballot boxes were. In fact, your reporter was saying that the camera was capturing the ballot boxes on the floor with the wind blowing them apart. And the question is, if somebody loses and the person or the candidate wants to make a serious case out of this, and the matter becomes a judicially contested matter, the Supreme Court has held that elections are held or won, lost or won at the polling station. Mm-hmm. If it becomes evident that ballot boxes have been torn and destroyed because of the absence of sufficient security to have forestalled this, the question is whether the election will have to go into a rerun. And elections that go into reruns are not the same as the main ones, because there's voter fatigue, and voters tend to think that they've done the first job. And so the dynamics may altogether change. So it's imperative that moving forward, some of these security lapses, if you want to call them security lapses, in places where there were clear cases of violence that could not be stopped, it's imperative that we probably do some introspection, and as I indicated, a flashback analysis after we're done, to say how best we can stop them moving forward. Hopefully they do not shape the election, and hopefully they do not become cause for tensions moving forward beyond the declaration at this stage.
Now, I'll never forget one of the things that came out of the work of the commission, this revelation that on the morning of the Ayawaso West Ogun by-election, there was actually a security briefing, let's call it that, some sort of parade gathering at Abelempe, where the people who later said they don't know each other, the police and the National Security Brigade or whatever they were both present in the same compound in Abelempe. This was revealed during the hearings. And I remember thinking what this means, and whether going into a massive national election, whether we could end up being undone by something as simple as a lack of communication, between security services. Now, I'm so grateful that we've gone through this election without much incident. But from where you sit, do you see enough having been done to fix some of these structural, obvious gaping holes in the structure of our security apparatus?
Beyond handing over the reports, to be honest, I do not have inside information on specific instances of reforms that may have been put in place. But you're quite right that the report clearly identified structural, systemic, and coordinating challenges that existed in the security apparatus. And multiple layers of reporting, multiple layers of authority and command, and in some clear instances, confusion in the command structure in terms of who authorized who to do what. And there were clear recommendations on how to align that. And I think I got a wind that there were some efforts in that direction. I'm not sure of further details in this respect, but indeed, coordination is key. And that was one notable fact that was identified in the whole commission's work. It was clear that the commanding authorities of the various agencies that were handling the security aspect of the elections were not necessarily speaking to each other with one language, were not necessarily in sync in terms of command and control as far as the hierarchy and structure is concerned. And so recommendations in this respect was put together. I think that in election security, invariably the police are at the top. And so while you may have allied security agencies that come in to help, ultimately the police are in charge. And the IGP made a couple of statements about how prepared the police were in this respect. My expectation is that probably these security alignments were put in place. Because it's very difficult sometimes to do some of these things, because in security terms, there are lots of things that are not necessarily revealed just for security reasons. So who knows if the alignments were put in place. But if they were put in place, one will expect that we see it in clear terms. Maybe our luck on this occasion is that we don't really have an incidence of widespread violence. And so it will be difficult to still tell whether the police reaction would have been that effective. Maybe the testing points would be the flash point for the various flash zones, such as the case of Oforiwa, as you mentioned, and the few instances where we had situations of violence. Maybe it would be useful again to go back when everything is done and dusted to see whether the coordination and the cooperation and collaboration that are expected in light particularly of the report.
Forgive me for cutting in. I'm being told by our producers that we have an update on the situation in Mfantseman. So let's go across to Studio 70 right now, where my colleagues are going to connect to Mfantseman and bring us the very latest on that.
All right, Coach, I'll take over from here.